Hi, I'm Alex, and this is New Game Plus. This episode is going to cover my decision to open and ultimately close a video game bar in Japan. And guess what? We're in it! I've got a couple of weeks left on the lease, so I figured, why not? Let's film an episode in the place that enabled and amplified my own drinking problem. I feel like I don't say this often enough, but if you don't have an AUD and do know how to drink responsibly, I'm not wagging my finger at you. I sold booze to people in this room for 10 years. I'm not some puritanical weirdo. My advice is meant for other addicts because no one talks about this shit enough, especially in Japan. But let's talk about the events that led to the opening of this bar. The year was 2006. Justin Timberlake had just returned Sexy. Jack Sparrow was in our theaters and Okami in our PlayStations. I came to Japan as a fresh-faced college grad, chubby after a senior year of Final Fantasy XI, pizza, and coconut rum, expecting some undefined career in video games to take off despite never bothering to cultivate new connections or learn any new skills. I discovered that Japan is very friendly towards alcohol and heavy drinking, and quickly fell into a habit of getting hammered and playing video games to forget that a career I'd never bothered to define likewise never bothered to crystallize. In 2012, I decided to open a video game bar after discovering one in a nearby town. You may have even read my article about Genesis in Ray Barnholt's Scroll magazine. I immediately fell in love with the idea of drinking myself into a brain haze while also playing Akamajo Densetsu out now. It took 2 years of planning and saving before Critical Hit opened here in downtown Nagoya on November 1st, 2014, where it continued until November 1st, 2024. My plan for this bar was to create a kind of sanctuary for myself. A basement full of video games where I could drink every day and wax poetic about rock men of all stripes to anyone willing to listen. For the first 5 years, this had its ups and downs. When my drinking spun out of control, I made the easiest decision of my life to quit cold turkey and have not had a drink since the end of 2019. This is an oversimplification, but after numerous attempts to cut back, I knew that quitting cold turkey was the only viable option for me. But the next couple of years were going to be crucial in understanding how and why I drank the way I did. In hindsight, it's an understanding of myself that I wish I had a long time ago, but was cut off from as alcohol intercepted my every effort to get there. That's how denial works. There's a part of you that realizes you're sniffing too close to the truth and so sabotages you by putting another drink in your hand. I spent 2 years with a therapist to determine what my underlying issues were. Ever since adolescence, I've always had trouble talking to people who don't know me, but I always chalk this up to general shyness and clumsiness. I was once described by a former employer as the most awkward person she'd ever met. In my post-booze life at the age of 41, a friend put forward the idea of autism spectrum disorder, and it felt like a giant puzzle piece locking into place. I realized that for half my life, I drank before attending any event. I drank before going out to a bar to drink because there would be people there. And when I started working a bar every evening, I started drinking just to deal with the people who came through the door. It took my masking to the next level, transforming me into a personable and outgoing host who just wanted to make sure that everybody in this room was having a good time. This created an idealized but ultimately false version of myself. But the social anxiety was only one factor. Another common trait of ASD is heightened sensitivity to external stimuli, things like bright lights and loud noises. Things that typically bother people when they're hungover. So when I quit drinking but kept jumping every time my wife sneezed or bristling every time a motorcycle passed, I knew something else had to be at play, which my therapist concurred was probably ASD. I say probably because an actual autism diagnosis requires a battery of tests and 250,000 yen. And even if confirmed, doesn't really change anything for me. This is largely because ASD1 isn't really recognized in Japan as a mental affliction, but that's a topic for another video. In the end, I realized that my self-medication was two-pronged. I was drinking to quiet the social anxiety that kept me from being comfortable around other people, while at the same time dulling my senses to the point that I wasn't constantly spooked by external stimuli. This realization has been invaluable in helping me identify how and why I fell into a 13-year booze loop that only intensified over time. Now, this understanding is all well and good, but it doesn't change the fact that these stressors still exist. As long as I'm running a bar, I'm going to be dealing with social anxiety and high sensitivity. Only now, I'm no longer self-medicating to combat them. When I quit drinking, those things came back full force. During the pandemic, the bar had to be shut for a few months. It was during this time that I got my first taste of earning an income through streaming, podcasting, and voiceover. Once the bar opened back up, I thought, damn, wouldn't it be nice to focus on making things and being a doofus online instead of dreading loud new people every day? Running my own retro video game bar had been my dream for years, and when I attained it, I never once entertained the idea of wanting to close. But I suddenly found myself working my dream job, but still dealing with the same social anxiety I had when I was an English teacher, teaching lessons in the daytime without the boon of alcohol to push me through the social element. It's common for self-medication to act as the entry point for this kind of dependency. I'd start my shift by drinking to silence the symptoms, then keep riding that wave all night because my brain was euphoric and loathed the idea of returning to reality. Similar to how someone might get hooked on opioids after a traumatic injury, I kept drinking even after the evening had died down and my symptoms were no longer present. This led to me drinking alone most nights, sipping shochu for hours because it felt great. I dreaded going home because it meant I would be reduced to a state that was no longer euphoric nor immune to my own anxiety and sensitivity. Wrapped in the soft, slow blanket of alcohol, I could sit and listen to music or podcasts, watch movies, or play games until I fell asleep on the floor. When I came to the unavoidable conclusion that being sober meant having to deal with these symptoms unfiltered, I made an appointment with a local specialist. We discussed medications for reducing anxiety, but I ultimately decided that after having quit alcohol and cigarettes that I'd rather not have to rely on a substance to feel normal if I could help it. I'm still functional without medication, I'm just anxious when placed in certain situations. Situations from which, I realized, I have the power to remove myself. And even if I had chosen medication, it would only be to continue working in a place where I'm surrounded by alcohol and video games, two things with which I have a very different relationship now than I did 10 years ago. There's a great academic journal that I will link to, done by a Japanese team specifically about the links between autism and alcoholism, and how understudied this area is. Conventional thinking used to be that people on the spectrum were less prone to addiction, but the studies done by this team seem to suggest the opposite. Matthew Tinsley, one of the researchers quoted, said that people with ASD drink for the same reasons as many other problem drinkers and alcoholics, but with a different degree of necessity. Elsewhere in the study, Lawrence Lalane's cases showed that patients drank to cope with anxiety caused by unexpected events, sensory overload, and interpersonal situations, and to improve their interpersonal skills. It me! All I did for myself when I decided to open this bar was to create a work environment where it was okay for me to drink every day. But that was my goal at the time, because I dreamt of not being anxious and sensitive every waking minute. And I got my wish! But uh-oh, it was attached to a volatility that began creeping into and disrupting every area of my life. While I regret my missteps and the power I let alcohol have over me, I do not regret my decades spent at Critical Hit. And I'm grateful to the incredible friends who helped me through these hard times. I quit drinking halfway through the bar's life cycle. This led directly to a change in perspective that has only improved my life in every conceivable way. Letting your brain grow back, so to speak, will make every aspect of your life gradually come back into focus. You become the person you were supposed to be before you got sidetracked by the dependency. And instead of giving into anxiety, you get to work on the things you had been meaning to do for years. Things like making YouTube videos, or starting a voiceover career, or studying game design. But the bigger lesson here is that dreams change. You're not locked into anything until you're in the ground. If making a drastic change or reevaluating a long-term goal is going to help you abandon destructive habits, yeah, you should probably do that. I don't mean to make it sound easy, I do mean to make it sound necessary. If you have any questions or comments for the next episode, especially about this bar, please leave them down below. And on a personal note, thanks to everybody who made this place special over the past 10 years. All the local regulars, all the podcast listeners, all the tourists who stopped in for one drink and stayed for 3. You are the greatest human beings to ever walk this earth. And I hope that whatever is next for me is even half as entertaining as the average Saturday night spent in this dank little game basement. Your experience and abilities will carry over.